Amos Hochstein was a senior advisor to President Biden. He's also the man who brokered the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire and many other titles. Amos, we're very glad to have you on Unholy today.
It's great to be with you. I've been a long-time listener, so it's great to be here.
We're glad to hear that. So very simple question to start us off. What do you think is going to happen in that Trump dilemma? Should I or shouldn't I? Is he going to go for it?
You know, one of the things that I don't predict is stock prices and what is happening inside Donald Trump's head. And so I'm probably, look, I don't know. I think the likelihood is significantly higher than it was at any point since the beginning of this. Obviously, he didn't want to do any type of military action. He came in on a number of big cases for his election. One of them was no more wars. I'm going to be the peace guy. I'll end Russia-Ukraine on day one. We'll get Gaza to be over, and we'll end the so-called forever war mentality of the neocon part of the Republican Party and go back to, I just do deals with everybody no matter what the situation is and avoid war at all costs, bring troops home from around the world and focus them domestically. So it's a massive transformation that we're now having conversation about the United States taking one of the most aggressive actions in the Middle East since the Gulf War and Afghanistan. And so, but having said that, it does look, all the signals are that that is what he is intending to do. And partly because I think he believes that this, once Israel took the step that it has, it's been so successful, you have to kind of bring it to a close. And the close is taking out Fordo. And since only the United States can do it, I think that's where he's heading. I'm never going to say that it's a done deal because, you know, a lot of stuff happens, but that's where I think it's heading.
Right. And there has been a lot of reporting that he has been more enthusiastic about joining, given the success that he's seen Israel have over the course of the last week, surprising even some of the top analysts that had estimated that Iran would strike back a bit harder than they have, but they seem to have been caught flat-footed. What if the United States ends up joining in, Amos, and does provide the bomb, the bunker buster bombs that Israel needs now to really degrade Fordo, and then just leaves? I mean, is that a scenario that the U.S. is gaming out right now? Would that be a possibility? And then he could keep his promise to not have boots on the ground necessarily, but at least close the Iran nuclear dilemma.
Look, first of all, to your last point, I think it's splitting hairs to say I'm not joining any wars because I didn't put boots on the ground. I just did aerial attacks. I think that's going to be tough to do. Look, I think what I'm hearing in the region, in the Gulf, and even among those who are quite supportive of doing this, the biggest concern that everybody has is this zero conversation about day after. And so let's take your question of, do you just do it? Well, what does just do it mean? One round? Not clear that one round would do it, and would do it meaning that Fordo is rendered completely inoperable and destroyed. So you have now to ask the question, do you have to do multiple rounds or not, and so on? Are you committed to the outcome versus the action? If you're committed to the outcome, then you keep going until you achieve it. The second question is, okay, Fordo's out. You still have to think about what do you do next? This assumption that the regime just collapses, we've heard this before. We've also heard that when a regime...
You've tried this before, we should say as well.
Yes, true, very true.
Rather unsuccessfully, right?
Remarkably, colossally unsuccessfully. Well, partly because we did succeed in collapsing the regime. The problem is that we bought into people telling us what it would look like when the regime collapses. A Jeffersonian democracy, a secret pro-Western population will rise up and take over. That has actually never happened, since the end of World War II. So I worry about there's no preparation for that at the moment at all. So Bianna, I think that we have to think about what is the action we take. And that's why I think that we shouldn't take a deal off the table yet, in my view. If the outcome is what we care about, not the action, and that is that Fordo does not turn into a militarized program, is it a given that the only way to get there is an attack? And when did we get to that point?
That's really interesting. When did we get to that point is a question, how and why. But before we get into that, I mean, I think the thinking in Israel is quite clearly, if only the United States comes in, attacks Fordo, and we're done. This round is done. The nuclear program is done. I'll take it one step further. The people who will really, go into that maybe pipe dreams mode would say, again, moderate forces will take hold in Iran, and this would be, a region engulfed by the Abraham Accords. Would you care to talk about what might be the risks? Because you are talking about an option of going to a deal before attacking Fordo, which might not be the scenario now. But what do you think the risks are if this happens? This attack, gets the green light from the president.
So first of all, I'm not convinced it's not the scenario now. I still think if I were back in my old job, I would still say, why don't we go out with a 72-hour ceasefire? With a deal on the table that largely dismantles the capability of Fordo becoming a military facility, with expanded inspections, maybe 24/7 inspections, et cetera, et cetera. And then whoever rejects it is the loser, right? So if Iran rejects it, then I stay out of the way of Israel doing what they have to do. And if Israel rejects it, I tell them I'm not. Then you're on your own. I'm not doing Fordo. Meaning, you put something, you don't have to negotiate it very much. You just say, here's the deal. So I think that there's a way to still have that outcome commitment. But let's talk about the risks, because I think they're underappreciated. Once the United States goes in militarily, it doesn't mean the Iran regime. There's no equation that says Fordo gets bombed, regime collapses. That is an outcome that is possible, but not necessarily. You also now have an Iranian civilian population that has been hit pretty hard itself. A lot of civilians are being killed and injured. The idea that they hate the regime doesn't necessarily, even those who hate the regime don't necessarily therefore like Israel. Okay. So that's your enemy's enemy is not always your friend. So a few things can happen. One, the regime doesn't collapse, and then they have options. They've just been attacked. If they think that the regime's very existence is in a threat, here are three things that I think that they are likely to consider doing. They have a menu of three options. Number one, attack American personnel, bases, entities, and infrastructure in the region. Those are much easier for Iran to do than hitting Israel, because actually we have an easier time defending our capabilities, can defend Israel easier than they can defend our own forces in the region. We are widespread, and we are not in a protection. We don't have the protection that we should have. Second option, hit Saudi and UAE, two countries that have been essentially seen by the regime as pro-Israel, or at least quietly supporting this campaign and conflict. It creates chaos in the region, inflames everything. Third option, not attacking any humans, but rather closing the Strait of Hormuz. The pluses and minuses for Iran are, you hit American personnel. One, it takes the American president's base and says, whoa, now we have casualties. You talked about boots on the ground. We have casualties. We're now in George W. Bush territory. That's the upside for the Iranians. President's under pressure. The downside is when you hit Americans, we hit hard, and we hit back and we hit hard. Number two, you hit Saudi and UAE. You inflame the region. That's the plus side. The downside, now those guys participate in strikes against you. That's not a good thing. So there's a plus and minus. The third of Strait of Hormuz, oil prices probably, it's just less of a third of oil that goes to the world. The world cannot replace that. Even if we are able to forcefully open the straits, takes a few months, chaos, the economy in the United States goes into recession. The global economy probably goes into recession, definitely China, India, Europe. So you now have no lethal, but now President Trump has a double problem. One, he's militarily active in the Middle East that he said he wouldn't be. And two, his other claim was, I'm going to do everything on the economy. And now the economy is in a recession and gas prices are through the roof. So these are real risks that you have to weigh before you take this. The risk for Israel on all these if what I just described happens, and it's a big if, the blame will be, the world will say we are in a recession because Israel went to war and created a chain of events. And the isolation for Israel becomes, even the people who support it now quietly will not do so once their economies are in recession. Or this conflagration in the Middle East becomes regional. So there are a lot of risks of taking this next side. I feel like in the discussion so far, it's been really because of the unbelievable successes that Israel's had militarily, that we have decided, therefore, there are no other asymmetric risks. And I think if I'm sitting back in my old job in the White House, my job is to tell the president, here are the risks for you personally, politically, for you, not from a national security perspective, economic security perspective. And I hope that somebody's also doing that in Israel.
So obviously, you just laid out some of the risks that would come from this escalating and the U.S. actually assisting Israel and going after Fordo directly. We have some 40,000 troops, I believe, stationed in the region, and many of them are exposed and more vulnerable than even Israelis who have been inundated by these missiles from Iran this past week. The Strait of Hormuz, if you close that, obviously, that would impact Iran's economy as well, not just globally. But you also have the concern over soft targets around the world. Iran has a long history of terrorism and assassination, so that ups the ante as well. If I could go back to the point you made about there still being room for negotiation, why hasn't Iran accepted that as of yet? I mean, they've seen what Israel has done just this past week. The president has been quite public saying, yes, you may have missed your opportunity, but there still is one. And then if I could follow up by saying, what if Israel takes the United States up on, their ultimatum? Listen, if you're not going to stop, you're on your own. If they really view this as an existential threat, it does sound like Israel does have contingency plans to do this on their own.
Look, I'm not convinced that I don't know what's happening behind the scenes on the conversations with the Iranians. I don't know if the Iranians are saying we're willing to come back to the table. I see some foreign leaders saying that Iran is telling them that they're willing to come back to the table. I think the Iranians also thought they were at the table when the war started. If you remember, Steve Witkoff had announced that talks would resume on Sunday, I think it was, when the attack started on Wednesday night or Thursday. So I think they thought they were at the table. I think that you have to look at this from a perspective of where did this start? The unraveling of the Iranian regime starts not now. It started last April. As of last April 12, Iran has 3 major deterrence factors. One is proxies. I can attack whoever I want, wherever I want, whenever I want, and I don't have to do it directly, and I have them everywhere. Number 2, and by the way, including terrorist cells around the world, etc. Number 2, I have a missile capability of reaching anywhere in the region. Number 3, I have the threat that I can press a button and I can militarize my nuclear program. On April, retaliating against probably a mistake that Israel made that should not have done, the Syria attack, but still a relatively small mistake compared to a retaliation of the largest missile attack from one country to another in world history of 100 ballistic missiles combined with another 200 UAVs. The United States coordinated a massive repel and defend operation that included several countries. And that massive attack was repelled near 100%. They did it again in October and once again repelled. And so the missile threat, not only did it go away, but it gave Israel the excuse, with the support of the United States, to take out the air defenses of Iran. So the miscalculation in April, you fast forward a year and it was devastating. They've made every mistake in the book. Their proxies are weaker to almost non-existent. Their missile capability is gone, and now many of the military. I say that because, to answer your question, I don't understand the Iran regime. I think they had every opportunity in the Trump administration to reach a deal, and they didn't, because I think that they accepted one fundamental axiom for them, which was the United States has never said we cannot have an enrichment program. It said it had to be limited and it had to be under inspections, and we had to have all kinds of conditions around it, but never said no enrichment. It said low-grade enrichment. And if you think about Witkoff goes to them, and what he said to the press at the beginning was 3.67 enrichment will continue. It'll be JCPOA++ because there'll be no sunsets, and we're going to get, it'll be longer, it'll be better, it'll be stronger, but with the same context of a deal. So I think they've always thought this is the deal that we can do. It's been a very short period of time of about 3 days, where the United States said no enrichment whatsoever, ever. So I think the space for a deal is really complicated. But I think your question about Israel to me is the bigger one, which is if the United States says we're not doing it, we're not doing Fordo, and therefore Israel says, okay, I'm going to take the next steps. I don't know what that looks like. And I don't know what the end game then is. And I'll say something a bit controversial, but in my mind, since Ronald Reagan, Israel doesn't have a stop button. It goes. And when it goes, it just keeps going. And since Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States at every turn comes and says, here's the off-ramp. And I'm mandating the off-ramp. And every prime minister, right-wing, left-wing, centrist, goes to his, whoever it is at the time, the military, the intelligence, his, extremist parties, and says, I'm with you, but these darn Americans are forcing me to stop. And he's like, all right, fine, we'll stop and we'll do a deal. And that's been the case in every operation since the 1980s. The war in Lebanon eventually gets that, and so on. This is a case where there hasn't been one. There hasn't been a stop button. And so if there isn't one, where does it stop? We talked about regime change. What if there isn't regime change? Is there a day where the military says, we have no more targets? I doubt it.
Yeah.
So there's always another target, right? So how does this end? So these are the questions that I think we're not having at all. And I think the danger of not having them is Afghanistan. The danger of where we were there for 20 years. The question of not having them is Gaza. And no matter how this ends, eventually this subsides from the headlines, Gaza comes back, right? So where does this, I've seen no discussion about that. And I think that's a very important thing to do. We have to figure out, what do we do to end Fordo from being a nuclear site? I believe that has to happen. We've gone too far now in this war to not reach a conclusion of how does Fordo become secure, either exploded or through a deal. And then the question is, how do you end it? And that's what keeps me worried.
Can I suggest, as a person who does not hold any official position in this country, the end game? And you are the one who brokered the Lebanon-Israel ceasefire, which is sturdy and is holding on. Because I would say, and is a better deal than 1701, mainly because Hezbollah was crippled. Perhaps also the negotiator was more talented, but it is a better deal and it holds. And isn't the end game here to say, first of all, from a strategic point of view, it was the right thing to attack Iran at this point because of the weakness of the aerial defenses, because of the weakness of the proxies, because at some level enriched uranium will turn into weapons-grade uranium, and we need to stop it before that happens. And I'm sure there was someone in the Biden administration who also thought about these things, perhaps. And the end game is saying we will weaken Iran to the extent that we can, and then we will return to the negotiation table. Does that make sense?
Of course. On paper, everything that makes sense. It's a weak country. It's an enemy. So you take the surprise attack and you decide to go after it. I think it's a dangerous sort of you're taking a position that is not officially the Israeli position, because the Israeli position was there was some kind of exclusive intelligence that said that Iran was about to go military. And the reason that is being said is because if you don't say that, then wait a minute, then well, why now? I have a lot of countries I don't like who are a threat to me. I don't go to war against them preemptively to take out their facilities. I can name a few.
Any of them attempt saying they want to annihilate Israel, the United States, and perhaps one day build an intercontinental ballistic missile that can hit everywhere in the world?
Yes, okay. Some of them are.
So there was no one in the Biden White House who said this might be the...
North Korea has said multiple times that they want to develop missiles
But
that
that
can
is
hit the
exactly the
United
point. The
States.
United States, yeah, I mean, the United States failed in stopping a nuclear North Korea and failed in stopping a nuclear Pakistan. Israel attacked Iraq and Syria and stopped those two countries from becoming nuclear. I'm saying, is there a rationale, generally speaking, is there a rationale for an attack on Iran, just in general?
There is a rationale, then you just stated it. I just think that you still have to ask the question, why the timing, right? I mean, was there something different last week than 3 weeks ago, or 3 weeks from now, or 3 years from now? Was there, if there wasn't any intelligence that said Iran's on the precipice, they've given the order, they've changed their policy, they're going to a military grade nuclear capability, then it's a little bit difficult, which is why Israel's position is there was such intelligence. Now, there are those who say, of course, you've seen it, that Israel has said that many times, right? Months away, weeks away, days away, for the last several years. So the rationale for taking out the Iranian capabilities is there. I think also those who criticize Israel for going after Iran preemptively sometimes forget that Iran opened the door to bilateral attacks from each other's country last April, and did it again in October. And they targeted civilian population. And if not for the United States, if it was just left to Israel's capabilities, hundreds, if not thousands of people would have been killed on April 14th. The United States and the non-Israel coalition part of it defeated more than half of the missiles. So people forget when they accuse Israel of unilaterally attacking Iran. Iran actually attacked Israel in an unprecedented way. And it was just because we were prepared for it. But that's not an excuse. The fact that Iran is not prepared for it now is also not an excuse that, oh, it's unfair, Israel is prepared, we're not. Well, that's your fault. So I don't quibble with there's no, oh, Israel did something that poor Iran, right? I mean, Iran deserves a lot. But going to war at will against countries you don't like, this is not Iraq and Syria, because Iraq and Syria was a single strike to take out a single facility. This is now, I mean, Israel took out a broadcast in the middle of a live broadcast. There are no missiles in a broadcast. This is not just. So that's what my fear is. When you have a justified attack, does it go beyond, at some point you don't have an end. And when you don't have a targeted end, you say, okay, now what? Now I'm attacking other things. Now civilians start getting hit because it's no longer that initial circle of targets that were entirely military, right? Missile production and so on. That's the danger here. Israel has every right to defend itself. Hamas opened this war on October 7. Iran decided to take advantage of it. It made a miscalculation and it's losing. My main concern here is what's next? What's next for the United States and what's next for Israel? And I worry about for the United States, I worry about those asymmetric consequences. And for Israel, I worry about a conflict that does not have an end as a goal. Wars that don't have goals tend to go on a long time. And that's the U.S. experience. Vietnam didn't have had a goal at the beginning, but by the end, it was an unrecognizable goal. And it just lasted for a decade. Afghanistan had no goal. So when you have no goals, they last forever. And that's my concern.
And you're right to bring up the years now that we've seen even Prime Minister Netanyahu alone threatening that Iran was just weeks away, days away, months away from having the capability to produce a nuclear weapon. But it is also worth noting that these strikes began, I believe, the day after the IAEA came out and for the first time in 20 years said that Iran was non-compliant with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So that is important to point out as well.
Yeah.
And there has been intelligence showing that they had become much more successful and focused on putting together a bomb itself, what is needed to put a warhead together. It was interesting to speak with former Defense Minister Gallant. Yonit also spoke with him in Israel and in Hebrew, and I spoke with him here. And I asked him if there had been discussions during his time in the Netanyahu government and your time in the Biden administration about just this. And he said yes, but not this specific plan, because obviously you still had Hezbollah in the picture. You hadn't gone after Iran at that point the way Israel did last year. But Brett McGurk, who is also one of your colleagues, told me that if Israel and the United States were to execute this successfully at this stage, that they have to be on the same page. And that is Fordo, 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 and that's it. This can't turn into a mission creep type of operation where Israel then after the fact says we're going to go after Khamenei and we're going to, even fathom the idea of regime change. We have the defense minister of Israel, I believe today, just saying that Khamenei is a target. And while every Israeli official said regime change wasn't one of their top priorities, if it happened, so be it. So what are your concerns there that the United States and Israel deviate post, let's say, a successful Fordo operation?
So one, I agree with everything you've said. In other words, the Board of Governors of the IAEA vote was a clear indication. Not only was it a vote to say that Iran was in violation, the overwhelming majority, where I think it was 3 countries who opposed, which was, I think, Russia, China, and Burkina Faso. And that's it. Everybody else said, look, Iran is... Now, Iran in violation doesn't mean Iran was militarizing its program on its own. It means it's in violation. It's doing things that are undeclared. And I think you're also right that part of the weakness for Israel is the over 2 decades of Prime Minister Netanyahu telling the world, oh my God, we're months away. And in 2012 and I think it was 2015 where he said it was weeks away. So you have to start translating what does a month mean? What does a week mean? A month doesn't mean 30 days. It could mean 6 years. And what does weeks mean? So I think that...
He meant 300 or 400 weeks.
Right.
Don't be petty.
Exactly. I think it's a weakness because you have those videos, right? That's the problem. When you say it's a weeks away in 2015 and then you come now and say days away, I was like, okay, so that means we have 10 years?
We've compiled it on CNN.
I know.
There's a video, yeah.
So is Jon Stewart. And so I think that that's part of the credibility factor. I think it's also very hard to say we're not here for regime change if you have your own ministers talking about regime change. If you're doing Farsi language interceptions of broadcasts and calling on people to rise up. In other words, you can't have it both ways, right? So I don't think we should be in the business of regime change. I don't think we should be in the business of assassinating political leaders. I think that's a very dangerous precedent to set. And I don't think it's good for Israel either. Assassinating political leaders opens the door for Rationale for people to do bad things in all kinds of places. And I don't think we should go there. And I don't think Israel should do it. And I don't think they should threaten. I also agree with Brett. Once you've gone into this attack mode where we are now, ending it and Fordo is still in full operation and there's no deal around it, there's no destruction of it, kind of renders the whole operation like, what did we achieve here? So something has to happen on Fordo. I agree with Brett on that. And I also agree can't have deviation. But Bianna, what is the deviation? Why is there a risk of deviation? Because I don't have a goal. There's no mission creep. Give me a conflict that hasn't had mission creep over the last 2 years. Even Lebanon was all about mission creep. The reason we were successful in Lebanon is because we were able to force an agreement before we negotiated of translating military gains into political gains and telling Israel, you want to keep going, you're going to go all the way to Beirut, because they were mission creeping. They kept telling us it'll only be 5 kilometers. And then it was 7, and then it was 10. And then they were attacking in Beirut. And then at some point you're like, okay, do you want to own a destabilized country to your north? Or we have a shot here of getting a ceasefire. And after, what people didn't focus on, after the ceasefire, I then continued working on a political weakening of Hezbollah. And that country is more stable today than it ever has before. If you destroy Tehran, then you have a destabilized country. And my biggest fear is that regime change happens and Iran looks more like Iraq regime change than anything else, and you have a factionalized country that is a magnet to jihadis and other bad actors from, it's a very porous border from Afghanistan and Pakistan and Turkey, and everybody comes into Iran, and suddenly I don't know what I get there. And then who knows what happens? And then I get a Iraq or a Yemen that is very difficult to defeat because there's no centrality to it. So I hope that before we take a strike, we also ask these questions and tell the Israelis, okay, oh, we agree, the B-2s do it, we take it out, and the next day we say all planes go back to your bases, everything stops. Has that been agreed to? I don't know. I just think we have to have these conversations.
By the way, Gallant stopped short. He said that the conditions to attack Iran existed during the Biden administration already. I mean, the fact that the proxies were weakened, Hezbollah was crippled, the aerial defenses were crippled, and also Israel managed to find this sort of open route or to open the route to Tehran. He stopped short, but he insinuated that the reason it didn't happen under the Biden administration did happen under the Trump administration was that the Biden administration pressed the brakes or didn't allow Israel to do that. Is that true?
I can't go into those conversations. A reason to go, we have two different definitions here. One was what we talked about before. If we believe that Iran is going, there's new intelligence, they are militarizing. The policy of the United States in successive administrations has been Iran will not be allowed to achieve nuclear weapons. That is the policy of the United States. Either they don't do it because they don't want to do it, they don't do it by a deal, or they don't do it because we deny them the capability through military action. All options were on the table. That has been said by every president for the last 30 years. And that was not just rhetorical. That was the policy of the United States. But going to war without that understanding that Iran is taking that last final step was also understood by all administrations that we're not going to do. We're not going to start a preventative war if we did not have that intelligence. So the question becomes, hypothetically speaking, if during a Biden administration, the question would go to the president, and the president would say, is there a fear that all other options are no longer viable and Iran is about to go nuclear weapons? And if the answer is yes, then the answer I think the president would be, then we have to do what we have to do. And if the answer is no, then he would say, then press whatever we have to do short of that. I don't know. And look, Trump did not give the green light when he came into office because we're today in June. He's been in office for 5 months. So the question is, what happened inside the month of June that while Steve Witkoff was negotiating, changed everything, and it was determined that it is no longer in the possible to wait, and the United States has to greenlight a military operation and potentially participate in it. That's the question.
Though he did agree to greenlight in his final months in office in the first term the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. So that was a decisive point and decision in his administration in those last few days.
But not related to nuclear.
No.
Right? That was on terrorism charges.
Yes. You've talked about the risks and sort of the worst case scenario if the United States does agree to participate militarily here. What are the risks if it doesn't? How is the rest of the world and how are other U.S. adversaries like China, like Russia, going to view the United States at the end of the day not coming to the assistance of one of its closest allies?
Oh, I think that I don't worry as much about that part because the United States has come to the assistance of Israel over the last 2 years in ways that leave no doubt in any country. There's no country that thinks, oh, the United States is going to abandon its allies because of Israel. If they have any of those concerns, it will be, not concerns, but if they'll draw those conclusions, it'll be around Ukraine, not about Israel. And the amount of material, personnel, we have a THAAD inside Israel with Americans there. We have moved aircraft carriers around the world multiple times in order to support Israel. We have done this in both. I mean, you think about what happened in the aftermath of October 7, in that first week of what the United States did with military personnel, carriers, strike groups, and the amounts of munitions. I don't think China thinks the United States is abandoning Israel. If they draw any conclusion for their own regions and theaters, it'll be around Ukraine. So I don't worry about that. On Fordo, what's the risk of not doing it? I think the risk of not doing it is you just launched a war at the end of which the Iranian most important nuclear facility is still running. And that's a bit of a, so what was this all about? I think the risk is that people feel like you stopped short at the last minute. Maybe I wasn't for you doing it, but if you did do it, you kind of like, once you're in, you're in. And I think, therefore, I keep saying, I'm not saying that the United States should strike it. I think the United States should be mindful that Fordo cannot be as it was at the end of this campaign. Whether you get there by a strike or you get there through a last-minute deal where you're basically using coercive diplomacy of saying, look, you're teetering, guys. You're losing this battle. You've lost so much already. All you have to do is swear off nuclear weapon capability and potentially enrichment or whatever. Like, the deal could have there are different ways of skinning that cat. But you have a deal done over the next few days that says Fordo is no longer what it was. That's how this has to end. Israel sees the only end as it's destroyed physically, but that has traditionally not been, neither Trump nor Biden nor Obama was that the conclusion. It was that Fordo cannot be allowed to move to nuclear grade ever. And so that can be done other ways. We're in this now. It cannot end. I agree with Brett. It cannot end with Fordo being what Fordo was 2 weeks ago. It has to change. And the risk of not doing, if you stop with nothing, Bianna, which I don't think really is an option right now, I think that would be just bizarre, like irresponsible at this point, regardless of what you think about how to get there.
My final question to you about, we talked a lot about the risks in the region, and when you think of just the overhaul of where we are, right, there's 7 days into the war, within the war, it's a war between Israel and Iran. The war in Gaza has been going on for 620 days. Can I ask for you to give us the optimist's version of how all of this can end?
Yeah,
better than you think it might?
Look, you know me, I'm traditionally an optimist, which is why it's a lot easier to get up in the morning every day in my last job being an optimist. I think if you do real diplomacy and real creative thinking, and you can get deals done. Remember, in Lebanon, everybody said it was not possible to reach a deal in Lebanon unless you reach a deal in Gaza first. Weak Hezbollah or not, it was just not possible. And we did do it. And we did it not because it was magic, it was because we decided that has to happen. The deal in Gaza, we actually had a deal in Gaza. And we got on that at the end of the Biden administration, we got hostages out, prisoners released, and the phase 2 was agreed to by the government of Israel and by Hamas and the Palestinians. And that was on day 14 of a 42-day ceasefire. You start negotiating phase 2, but basically the parameters of phase 2 were decided in advance. All hostages and alive and deceased come back. A certain amount of prisoners are released, and Israel withdraws from most of Gaza. And they deal with the day after. That did not get implemented. Israel never went back to that negotiating table. Gaza has to end. And for Israelis who think, okay, Gaza's off the headlines in Israel, it is not off the headlines around the world. And it is still, I think, a major risk for Israel. So the optimist version is Fordo we get some kind, I think the best case scenario to me is still a last minute deal that prevents a strike on Fordo, and that Iran capitulates some of its longstanding red lines and agrees to some kind of deal on Fordo that gives us 20 years before we have to deal with this again. And we go back to the table on Gaza, realizing how precarious everything here is. Iran is weakened even further. Hamas is weakened. We do a deal on Gaza. We get the hostages out finally, and Israel withdraws from most of Gaza with a day after plan. That is the optimist version, because I think then Israel walks out of this with unparalleled military strength in the region. It is the dominant military force of the Middle East. And it's able to rebuild a society that has been at war for psychologically and physically at war for 2 years and is able to thrive again. That is the optimist version. And I think President Trump should be focused in that direction and put all its efforts into trying to reach those deals. But knowing that Israel on its own will not reach these deals, and Israel on its own, militarily on its own, cannot go back to living in peace. It won't happen. You cannot do this with military alone. Military gains have to be accompanied and converted to political gains.
And just to button this, I know Yonit said it was the last question, but on that point, do you think that President Trump, in the best case scenario, has leverage and possibly has already expressed to Prime Minister Netanyahu, we will help you finish Fordo, and then in return, you need to finish the war in Gaza?
I don't think the United States president ever needs a specific item as leverage. We always have leverage. Again, Israel has a mantra that I've always disliked, which is by itself for itself. And it's insulting as an American official to hear it after the last 2 years. After what happened on October 8 to 11, and what happened that whole year, the massive amounts of munitions that Israel needed from the United States, the deterrence against Hezbollah joining the war on October 8th, the missile attack on April and October. We have more aircraft carriers and destroyer groups in the Middle East right now than anywhere. And to be told like, yeah, we did everything by ourselves for ourselves. No, you can't. So the leverage is always there, Bianna. I don't believe any leverage that says, hey, Bibi, I'll do this, but you need to end the war in Gaza. Because, no, I want to. That's what I'm doing. Because if it has no definition, he'll continue going. The war in Gaza can only end if Israel is forced into or is brought to the table in a real way to say, this needs to end in the next X amount of days. You're going to have to live with the fact that you will not be in Gaza controlling the entire place. And we'll have to work together with the Arab countries in the Gulf to come up with a viable day after plan. Because otherwise we're in a catch-22. Israel says, I can't get out unless there is a in place day after plan that is not just in theory, but in practice. And at the same time, not actually negotiating or coming to an agreement on a day after plan. So it's that thing about what is something that is always around the corner but never arrives is tomorrow, right? I mean, it's always like, okay, we'll do that tomorrow. So there has to be a negotiation where Trump says, Bianna, not just I'll do this and you end it. Because I don't know what that means, you end it. Neither does the Prime Minister of Israel. It's never been articulated what Israel's view of the end of the war in Gaza looks like. The only people articulating it are the far-right extremists who are saying it ends with total occupation and building of settlements. They may not be the government of Israel representatives, even though they are the finance minister and the security minister. But they're the only ones who actually articulate something of what it looks like. The Prime Minister of Israel has not said, here's what the end of war looks like. So President Trump's going to have to do more than just say, you have to agree to end. And so I still think it's entirely possible to reach an agreement on both Gaza and the region that allows Israel to say, we won this round, we're coming out of it stronger, and we now have to rebuild at home and rebuild our relations around the world. And it will take some time, but ultimately Israel comes out stronger. But that starts with the recognition that you need to do it. That's the optimist approach. I think it's entirely possible. I think President Trump's administration has a unbelievable opportunity set here to reshape the Middle East, but it's not a foregone conclusion because it requires one basic thing, and that is an acceptance that military can bring you to the table, but it cannot solve it on its own.
Amos Hochstein, we really appreciate you talking to us today. Thank you so much.
It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.